Today we're going to be taking a look at everything you need to know about combat in Fallout Wasteland Warfare, right after this. Hey everyone, Sam here from the Tabletop Hub, your one-stop shop for all things tabletop, and today we are continuing the series where I will be teaching you everything you need to know about playing Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Now last time we looked at everything you need to know about movement, and today what I really want to do is go over the combat mechanics in the game, from shooting to throwing, line of sight, elevation, cover the whole lot. So let's get stuck in. So shooting in Fallout Wasteland Warfare is resolved much in the same way as a lot of other things in the game, with a skill test. When you look at your character card and have a peek at the stats on the right hand side here, you'll see a number of icons. There's a handgun or an AK-47 or a knife, and these all indicate what stat you have for each respective category. The knife is melee, the grenade is thrown weapons, the AK is a rifle, and so on. So when you want to make a shoot action using a ranged weapon, the first thing you've got to do is actually make sure your character has the relevant skill in order to pass the skill test. And then you've got to roll equal to or lower than the number you see here on the card. So the higher the stat, the better chance you have of succeeding. The next thing you've got to do is make sure that whatever you are hitting is actually within range. Now for this, you look at the weapon card for the respective weapon you're planning to use. For example, if we want to look at the assault rifle, you'll see these two colored bars. Now this works very similar to movement. This first bar indicates the short range limit. Get the ruler that corresponds to that color and measure it out. If your target is within that distance, you'll get to roll these two dice along with your skill test. If your target isn't within short range, it may be within long range. Now to calculate this, you take the short range ruler and add the long range ruler that corresponds to the color on the card. If your target is within long range, then you'll calculate damage using the colored dice you see here. In essence, the closer you are to your target, the more benefits you'll get in some cases. If your target isn't within long range, then there is no way that you will hit them. The third check you have to carry out before you can carry out your actual skill check is if your target is within line of sight. Now for this, you look at the models from above and see if you can draw a straight line from any part of the attacking model's base to any part of the target's base model without being blocked by anything. Now if there is another model standing between you and your target, and it is a normal sized model, it doesn't block your line of sight, it'll just make it harder to hit, which we'll discuss later. If, however, it's something like a super mutant behemoth or Liberty Prime, then understandably that would hinder your line of sight. Basically anything with a base of 60mm in diameter or wider will block line of sight for any smaller model. So now that we've discussed line of sight, let's talk about cover. Unlike the other aspects we've been talking about, cover does not dictate whether you can or cannot shoot at another model, it simply dictates the likelihood to do damage. So, to check for cover, draw a line from the center of the shooter's base to the center of the target's base. For each object that line passes through, place a -2 cover modifier on the skill value of the attacker for that shot. If the attacker's shot is affected by cover, you'll equally add +1 to the target's armor for that shot, and unlike the negative modifier for the attackers, this is only applied once, it's not stackable for each piece of cover. Now if you are shooting into a tree line or into some smoke, you'll still count this as normal cover, while normally your line of sight needs to exit and enter an object to be classed as cover. Smoke, fire, or a forest only need to be entered by your line of sight to be classed as cover. Now regarding other models in line of sight, if the attacker's shot passes through a friendly model on its way to its target, they don't suffer a cover penalty for that, because the idea there is that since they're working on the same team, they'd probably move out of the way. If the shot, however, passes through an enemy model, this does act in the same way that normal cover would, so add that -2 modifier to your shot. So now that we've discussed ranged combat, let's talk about close combat. In Fallout Wasteland Warfare, when a model is in base-to-base contact with an enemy model, they're engaged. When a model is engaged, their attacks can only be close combat attacks, which equally can only be directed towards enemy models with which they're engaged with. Resolving close combat rules is a lot quicker than ranged attacks. Understandably, you don't need to see if they're in range or if there's any cover. All you've got to do is, once again, check your character card for the icon that corresponds to the icon on your close combat weapon and roll a skill check for it. Any effect dice that you see on the weapon card from your character's equipment or from perks will equally modify the skill dice roll, and if your model has a total strength of 7 or more and they're using a close combat weapon, add 1 bonus black dice effect dice to that roll. But what if your model is only wielding a ranged weapon when they're engaged in close combat, Sam? Well, this is completely fine. A model can use a ranged weapon while in close combat. Just imagine them butting their opponent with their rifle or pistol. But if your model is doing this, the attack is made as if one piece of cover affected the attack, so add a -2 skill value penalty and increase your opponent's armor rating by 1. Equally, if the model you're using to attack in close combat with a ranged weapon is a super mutant, you can use their melee skill for the role instead of the appropriate ranged skill. So depending on the skills and the weapon used, you may want to use or make use of that aspect for a greater chance of hitting. Now there are 4 quick points to wrap up close combat before we discuss thrown weapons. First of all, let's discuss moving while in close combat. So after carrying out a close combat attack, you are permitted to carry out what is called a slide. Basically what this means is that you can reposition your model by sliding it around the base of your opponent. Now you cannot break base-to-base contact with your opponent when carrying out a slide, and as such your opponent does not get a free attack when you do this, but this can enable you to catch another opponent in base-to-base combat and stop them moving any further. Secondly, if you want to disengage your model from close combat, all models it was in base contact with get a free quick action attack. And thirdly, if a model is engaged with multiple opposing models, it's outnumbered. Any attack rolls against an outnumbered model receive 1 bonus green accuracy effect dice. Finally, if a model is making a close combat attack and has a charge bonus marker next to it, 1 black or green effect dice is added to their attack roll depending on the color of the charge bonus marker. If the model has 2 charge bonus markers, then 1 black and 1 green effect dice are added to their attack roll, as you would expect. So, let's come into land by discussing thrown weapons, and this is very simple. A model can only use thrown weapons if they have the thrown weapon icon. Skill checks, line of sight, cover, they're calculated exactly the same as normal ranged weapons. The range at which your character can throw the thrown weapon is determined by the colour of the thrown icon on your character card. If you use a thrown weapon while engaged in close combat, you can only throw it at a model with which you are engaged with in close combat, and critical icons are completely ignored for thrown weapons in general. And finally, if you fail a thrown test with a thrown weapon that has the scatter icon on it, a scatter occurs before their effect is resolved. Basically what this means is that you suck at throwing and completely missed, but what we need to figure out is where you threw it and what it hit. So take your weapon card. Now the distance that your thrown weapon traveled is indicated by the amount by which it failed the test. The direction it travels in is completely random. So for this, take a scatter token or advantage token and flip it onto the table. And the direction it points is the direction it goes. Now, if while traveling in that direction, the thrown weapon passes through an obstacle, it'll hit that obstacle. So you've just got to hope that a friendly model doesn't happen to be that obstacle, basically. And if you have thrown an explosive or Molotov cocktail that would have an area of effect, just look at the color of the icon on the weapon card and that'll tell you the range of the area of effect with which that weapon would do damage at. And this is the same for rocket launchers and grenades and Molotovs, etc. And folks, that should be all you need to know to get started with combat in Fallout Wasteland Warfare. I will be sharing some advanced rules for combat in my next video where we'll discuss things like mines, elevation, and shooting into crowds. But for now, I don't want to completely melt your brain into a glowing pile of red radioactive mush because there's a lot of info in today's video. So for now, if you have found this video helpful, of course, do feel free to leave a like, subscribe for more Fallout Wasteland Warfare content, and why not join the conversation over on Discord, which is linked in the video description. But until next time, folks, have a great week, and I'll speak to you all soon.